Okay, so officially welcome everyone. This is our fourth webinar in the series about developing your multicultural content. And this time around, we're going to be talking about something that's a little bit, challenging, controversial, call it what you will, but we're going to be talking about the cost of translations, and we called it, why are translations so expensive? It's a bit controversial. So let's see if we can get going with that. Andrea, thank you, behind the scenes. So that's me. Many of you know me. I am the founder and director at Polaron. I still work as an interpreter and translator from time to time in the Polish language pairs. Moving on, Andrea, thank you. And I wanted to introduce you to two people that are so much better in talking about money than I am, that you will not believe it. The first person is Nicholas, who many of you that have done work with Polaron would have worked with. He is the person that will scope the project that you might be getting a quote on. He will be the one that will get you the best deal in the world. He will be the one that will negotiate all the moving parts of a project, and we'll give him an opportunity to speak shortly. The other person I wanted to introduce you to, and again, many of you might know him already, is Dominic Carter. He's our Finance and Systems Director. So he is definitely the money man at Polaron, and he's definitely the person that can tell us more about costing and what happens behind the scenes, and how prices are calculated without giving too much away, of course. Thank you, Andrea. This is just a picture of one of our events, which we do annually in March. This year we've had to cancel, but we are potentially looking at running the forum on diversity in November to coincide with our 20th anniversary. Yes, we have been around for 20 years, and it is something that we need to celebrate, I'm sure. And we're looking at perhaps doing that in conjunction with our forum in November. I will provide more information to everybody in due course. But that's who we are. What we do, all kinds of things to do with language, with culture, with communication, with disseminating information to diverse communities in Australia. And that includes anything from interpreting to translation to developing videos. In the last few years, if not months, we are learning to be even more agile, even more creative, even more responsive to our clients' needs. And we do work with our clients and community at large, I guess, to develop information in a way that people understand. That's really important to us, so that we keep up with the demand, we keep up with what people want to hear and how they want to hear, how they want to receive information, because all of that is changing, as we're coming out of COVID. I think we've learned many, many lessons, and one of them is that, yes, you can indeed create a lot of digital content, but the first thing you need to look at, I guess, from our point of view, is how will that reach your audiences? How will that reach your community? Thank you, Andrea. So I personally, and everybody at Polaron, truly cares about the quality of the work we produce. And we work until we get it right. It means all kinds of things, but essentially, it means co-designing whatever it is that we are working for you on with the communities that your information is intended for. And one of the things that I live by is that I'm only ever as good as my last translation, and I will only ever sound as good as my interpreter. So we don't rest on our laurels. We keep working on creating products and services that really are aimed at the communities that you're working with. The other thing that I feel very strongly about is ensuring that we are supporting our local translators and interpreters. So I don't know if you know this, those of you that are listening to the webinars, but the industry's been hit pretty hard when COVID happened. People that have been hit the hardest have been interpreters, because we no longer have as many face-to-face interpreting sessions as we used to. And what that means for some languages and for some interpreters is reduction of work of up to 95%. So we only work with Australian translators. We only work with NAATI-certified colleagues, and we try and support people that we work with through providing professional development, but also paying them as well as we can. We also work with ethno-specific community organisations, and we also pay them for the contribution. And we try and understand who you're going to be communicating with. So moving on to the next thing that I'll hand over to Nicholas, but I will say also, just looking at my notes here, that we have been witnessing, changes in how translations are made in Australia, and that also means that we are seeing translations being sent overseas, and it's a worry because that work doesn't get to Australian translators and interpreters, and it's a worry because we don't know about the quality of what's being produced, and it's a worry because the people who might be wonderful translators might not understand the local context. What Nick's going to be talking about is an example project. This particular one is a multilingual project with many moving parts. Over to you, Nicholas. Tell us how it works at your end.
Thanks so much, Eva. Reiterating what Eva's saying, we do like to keep things local, and it's very much the same for this multimedia project that we handled back in June last year. Now, this was for the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission. We basically were handed a big brief by them, which was a fishing line out saying, help us with this massive multilingual project we need done. It was a consumer video about the new aged care standards, and they needed it translated into multiple languages. Before I dive into the vigorous process that we follow for our community-approved and multimedia projects, I just want to divert your attention to this image on the right here. Now, if you can just look, it's a bit hard to see, but there's a few dates there and a bunch of different steps that these project managers here at Polaron go through, coupled with the languages there and all the different documents that they need to translate. From the outside, just looking at that, you can see how intensive such a process can be. So I'm just going to run you through each of those steps as to what we go through here at Polaron when dealing with a project such as this. So what happened first, we discussed with clients about their aims, obviously, their audiences, how they want to reach those audiences, and what are their goals and how are we going to achieve that. That's a big part of the process for us, as we really do care about the client's needs, but also about the client's audience needs. And that's our cold communities here in Australia. Once we've done that briefing, we then develop an action plan. And that action plan is quite similar to what we've got here on the right. It's a big project plan that pretty much step-by-step outlines when things are going to be completed, how they're going to be completed, and what steps are going to be taken for those. Ethno-specific organisations then need to review that content. And this is part of our community-approved translations. I might move out of the side just so you can see it behind me. It's a big deal at Polaron, and it's something that we've come up with a few years back and have stuck to our guns about it, as it is a really, really true and accurate product. So with those ethno-specific organisations, we get them to review the English collateral just to make sure that it's culturally sensitive and that it takes into account the actual community's needs. If there's something in there that is not going to be useful or might be a little bit offensive, those community leaders and their organisations will make that known, and then we're able to give some feedback to the client. Once all of that review and briefing has been done, we can then move on to the next steps in the project, which is a client sign-off, and then the English source content is delivered to Polaron. This is where the fun begins, and this is where the translations begin. So what will often happen is we'll need to transcribe a video if there is no transcript. If the organisation has done their due diligence, then there most of the time is a transcript. So once that happens, we prepare that for translation. And as Eva's mentioned, this is done by a NAATI-certified translator, and it is kept here in Australia because we do care about quality. Once the NAATI-certified translator has gone through the English source content and developed their in-language material, We then like to go to a second independent checker who is also a NAATI-certified professional. Now, there are rarer languages where we might not have as big of a pool to go through, but where applicable, we always use those NAATI-certified professionals to check that work. Once the checking has been completed, those suggestions and amendments from the second checker will then be fed back to the independent checker. And now this is where the help of the project manager is really, really important, because they are that middle piece that links the checkers, the ethno-specific organizations and the translators along with the client all together to help that communication stream effectively. Once the feedback is given, the initial translator who worked on that project accepts or rejects any of those comments and then delivers a final translation, which we can now take to our community for review. I'll jump to the next slide, please, Andrea. Once we are here, so we've obviously met with our ethno-specific organizations at the beginning. We're back to them now and we've got some translated collateral. Usually it's in the form of DTP. Sometimes it's still in the translation stage. It does vary depending on the client specifications and requirements. They'll then get back to us with any cultural appropriateness that they need to flag, whether there's any terminology used that might not be accurate or sensitive for their community, because at the end of the day, the community leaders and their organizations and the people on the ground know it best. And they know what works. So we consult them and then we get feedback back from them. Once we've got that, we then head back to our translator again, more running around on the ground for our project managers. They take all of that feedback and give it back to the initial translator. At the end of it, we have finally got a finalized product that is both accurate, culturally sensitive, and consistent across all of the terminology in that translation. Sorry, I might just jump back if I can, Andrea, sorry. The next few steps are in relation more so to the multimedia aspect of things, because we can just stop the translation there and develop brochures, any kind of website translation, any kind of flyers, and that will still entail the community approved process. But in some cases, like this one for the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission, we did go that step further and we developed that video for them as they requested. So what happens here, subtitles are produced and our in-language DTP specialists need to caption the videos. They also need to book recording facilities and get voice talents to speak on those scripts. Now, it's really important to get voice talents because they are familiar with the expressions, how to speak into those microphones and get the best audio out that is going to suit the videos. Once that's all been done, the recordings are finalized and we can then move to our video editing specialist to apply all the voice recording and on-screen text. At the end of all of these 14 rigorous steps, we end up with a final product that is then sent to the client for approval. And in most cases, we are open to feedback and changes where applicable. I might now move on to the next slide, if I can please, Andrea. So this sample project, before I speak any more on it, I want to show you what it turned out to and how it looks in language. So if we can, Andrea, jump onto that link there. And I bet that a lot of people are looking at that project team can involve up to 150 people and are already a little bit shocked. But
yes, I agree, because what you described, sort of neat steps that are, very reasonable, very organized. But what actually happens, I often say that translation is like the other side of tapestry, where there's knots and all kinds of things that we've got there. That mean that we've done work behind the scenes, but what the client sees is a smooth, beautiful picture.
Yeah.
I think we're having issues, Andrea, with the video.
Yeah. Look.
Okay, so we'll get back to it. On. Yeah.
Look, after the presentation, I'm sure we'll link it through anyway. But
can just share the video right now, guys. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Can you see it?
Yep. Audio, maybe.
Yeah, we can't hear it, and we need the screen. Yeah. The wonders of technology.
All right, regardless, with no audio, I might just talk on it then. So you can see here that there is obviously a large component of captioning there. There's obviously a transcript behind, which we can't hear at the moment, but there is also that voice recording that was involved in that, and then the on-screen text as well, which had to be included. And now here's where I draw your eyes to it. But this project, all up, involved 150 people plus. Yep. So that is staggering. The amount of project managers, NAATI-certified translators, NAATI-certified checkers, the ethno-specific organizations, which in themselves carry multiple personnel, IT specialists, sound engineers, DTP specialists, subtitling specialists, graphic designers. The list is endless. And it all comes down to these people up the top here to manage those projects. Now, it's at times difficult, challenging, and overwhelming, but these guys are very well trained and up to the task to complete these sorts of projects. Now I might move on to the next one, just to go a little bit more into depth as to what this kind of project entails and how these guys work around it, the project managers. So as I mentioned earlier in the piece, working within the client's brief is really important to us. We are obviously driven by certain things to the client. That's time constraints, that's budget constraints, and that's where I most of the time and Polaron most of the time are that point of resolution. We are connecting you to your translators, your NAATI-certified translators, your ethno-specific organizations, your checkers, your specialists, and we are negotiating prices with them while also trying to help you with your budget. We understand there are budgetary constraints, and we're trying to do our best to negotiate with translators to get you the best price possible for the best possible value. And that's where that big to and fro comes into client briefs and working out what's going to work best for you guys, as well as those people on the ground that are doing all of the work behind the scenes. So that's a really big part of projects and this project in general. Coordination of moving parts. Now I've mentioned that as well as a really big step that the project managers need to take often. When there's feedback relayed, who's going to move it on? Who's going to be able to take that feedback to the next person and get it back, get a final result, and let's put it all into that design. That's the coordination of moving parts, and it's such a really pivotal thing to the project that people often overlook. There are deadlines, there are technical considerations, there is time constraints within those deadlines that we need to meet. The translators have got lives of their own. They've got lots of other things, lots of other responsibilities. So it's our project managers on the ground that manage those deadlines and those constraints and budgetary concerns, and it all comes through to them. So there's a big consideration there for them. The third part here is specialist equipment. This is a big thing that's often overlooked when I speak with my clients. They go, wow, that's quite a large cost for that component of maybe voice recording or subtitling or whatever it may be. But there was a huge upfront and still ongoing cost of technical equipment for us as language service providers. We do often need to supply you with the best possible quality, and that only comes from the best possible equipment that we can use to deliver that. So that's things like subtitling software, video editing software, recording facilities, studios, those microphones, those headsets, all of those quality assurance methods that we use behind those equipments as well. There's a few things that stack up to ensure that cost is valid and valued. And then lastly, this one is more so in relation to rare and emerging languages. It might not be the case for you if you do choose to go with a project that is simpler in its language choice. But typically when dealing with rare and emerging languages, we want clients to understand that you might not receive the same pricing as you would for a standard language. This is simply because the resources are often at times a lot more diluted, and there's not a lot in the market in terms of rare and emerging languages. There'll be some languages where there might even be one recognised practicing translator on NAATI, and that's what we're dealt with. And at often of times they've got negotiating power as well, We do obviously try and get the best price, but it is sometimes that consideration we need to think about when we're looking at rare and emerging languages.
And Nicholas, I was going to ask you at that point, because that's a question that I'm sure that it's on everybody's mind. Is it worth it? Like all this effort and we're describing here a best case scenario, and sometimes it'll be one word in a rare language that people are having massive arguments about. Because everyone thinks their own language and everything.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks that they're right. So as far as feedback from clients, why do they go through all this pain? Why do you put them through all this pain, Nicholas?
Why do we put them through this pain is a great question. And simply because of the quality that emerges from this and the reach that they're going to get with their cold communities. I say often enough that if you're not going to translate your content for the socially responsible aspect of things, do it for the business sense as well. When we're going through this effort, making videos that are in language, doing it in 25 languages, just trying to get out to the cold communities, you're opening up your reach to 25% of Australia. Yes, crazy. 25%, a whole quarter of Australia, you are going to reach more meaningfully just by translating your resources. And that's because at home, a quarter of Australia speak a language other than English. And that's huge. It's massive. And that's why we go through this pain every day. That's why we go with the client hand in hand and run off the cliff with 25 languages on our back, because it is so important. It is so important to get that stuff translated and to do it in a meaningful way. Like, we can always go through and just get it standard translation done. That's it, a very transactional process. Or we can go through this process that we're talking about here, which is a lengthy, approved process that involves a bunch of different stakeholders and people to deliver the best possible translation.
So essentially what we do, and I'm sure that people can see that, we co-design communication with each community. And I think the other thing that I should add here that we often say in the office is that unless you're going to do this in a genuine way, don't do it at all. But if you don't do it at all, the cost of not doing it at all is much, much higher than doing it. And not doing it further isolates people. So when, let's say in a hospital setting or health setting, when you have people that come to your service and they are essentially not knowledgeable or not aware of certain things, it's because that information wasn't provided to them in the first place. And then the cost to the service, to the taxpayer, to your job increases because that initial education and communication wasn't done at the outset, I guess, is the way that I would describe it. So Andrea, maybe we'll move on to the next slide, because that, I believe, is my bit now.
Yep. Why don't you take it away from here, Eva?
Thank you. Look, I do hate talking about money and price, and that's why we have Nicholas and Dominic here. But it is true that we might at times charge more than others, and there are reasons for that. And yes, you can get your translations done cheaply. You can get them done in India, let's say, where they're given to people who may not necessarily speak either of the languages as a native language, for example. Or you might send them to Europe or wherever it is, and there may be fantastic translators, generally speaking, but they won't have the local knowledge of the community here in Australia. And of course, you can get them done for free. You can use one of the automated tools, or you can Google Translate, whatever. But I've put there up on the screen an actual email that we received, and it says, I was putting our translated fact sheets on our website when an Arabic-speaking colleague told me the Arabic version looked all garbled. It turns out that the text was mirrored on the page. Can you help? So when this happens, it's actually a good thing, because at least you know it's happened. I think in a lot of cases when translations aren't done well, you don't even know that you've had an issue with the translation because you don't speak the language. It looks Chinese, it looks Arabic, it looks Greek. Like how would you know? So the process that Nicholas described earlier is painful, but the output, the outcome is something of such good quality that you can sleep at night, and no one's going to walk past your screen once you're putting those things up on the website and say, well, it looks garbled. And it is co-designed with the community in mind. We take their feedback on board. At the end of the day, it is you, the client, who actually has the final say, because sometimes we do come across issues that are not so much linguistic but cultural. And at the end of the day, the message that you've got isn't lost in translation. And if we move on to the next slide, Andrea, thank you. And how do you know that the price is fair? Look, you know, we are in a competitive market, so I think what I would be recommending to people is to shop around. Of course, we want you to work with us, but shop around, ask a lot of questions, because what you need is transparency, which is something that we've been very strong advocates about. You know, find out who are your translators, where are they? Can you have a look at their CVs? You know, can you talk to them? What are they working on for you? What are specific issues? How are they supported by your language service provider? Where are they done? Is there a traceability report? Do you know the NAATI number of your certified translator? You need to be taking part in briefing meetings, in debriefing meetings. If translation was easy, everybody would be doing it. The process that Nick's described is not an easy process, and therefore it requires genuine engagement on your part. However, the secondary benefit of it is that you will be confident about the quality of your translation, and you'll get to know your community and their issues and their preferences and everything that you need to know about them. And the other thing I would be strongly advocating for everyone is to have a good, strong relationship with your LSP, or language service provider, based on trust. If you're not receiving transparency reports, if you're not receiving people's names that have worked on your translations, ask yourself why. And the other thing that your translation should be doing, and your language service provider should be doing, is connecting you to your audiences. And on that note, we're going to move on now to talk about the thing that everybody's come to talk about, and that's money. Over to you, Dominic. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. I think you've got a lot of things to say about this, so I'll just hand over to you, and over to you, Dominic.
Thank you, Ava. I do have a lot of things to say, and apparently about 2.5 minutes to say them in. So let's briefly look into what goes into behind the quotes that we give and our pricing. Because we're a company, we have a building, we have rent, we have desks, we have computers, we have programs, we have things like that. We have insurance and so on and so forth, and advertising and so on. And then we have staff, we have people, and you've seen the work that the project managers do. But that's once the project started. To get the project to the door, you need a salesperson, you need a strategy, all sorts of things. So all of that comes with a cost, and those overheads will be larger or smaller depending on the provider that you have. Smaller providers tend to have smaller overheads, larger providers tend to have larger ones. And then the volume of work they have defines how much of that overhead gets passed on to you per project. And then there is the cost per project. And then that is, you've seen 150 people in the example that Nick gave in his behind the scenes explanations there. 150 people need to get paid for the work that they do. And there's several touch points. So translators, interpreters, checkers, community checkers, the voice talent, DTP people. And then you can add on top of that, some people might need to go somewhere as part of this, and there's travel expenses. So all of that adds up to build the quote. Can we move on to the next slide, please, Andrea? Overall, I would like to say that there are two things that happen. We try to keep everything in Australia, so everything is more expensive in Australia in the world of translation than it is elsewhere. So, for example, depending on the language combination and the country, I guess, and the service, a translator's work will typically cost between 2 and 5 times more in Australia, typically. You might find sometimes 1.5, you might sometimes find 6. It really depends on the service. For example, checking in Australia is priced at half the price of translation for translators. We pay them half of the price to check the translation, then we pay the translator. Overseas, that is typically a quarter. So already you've got a larger component just because of tradition, just of how it's done here. Then you get what you pay for. So if you pay less, typically you're getting less quality or you're getting less input from your project managers along the way. When you end up with a product less adapted to your market. For example, again, the Arabic example that Ava showed, talked about with the Arabic being displayed back to front, there wasn't a quality checking process for that part of the job. Or maybe the client just got the translations and got somebody else to put them online. There wasn't a farm to the plate solution presented to them with quality points, checkpoints along the way. So when you get a quote from various providers, let's say it comes in 10% cheaper than ours, then they probably, our competitor has smaller overheads. Or maybe they provide us a bit less, or maybe a bit of both. In those cases, I'd recommend you come and talk to us. If a quote comes in 20% less than ours, then you're probably not buying the same service that we provide, or something is going overseas. A lot of companies have project management, for example, based overseas. So they'll still use Australian translators and Australian checkers. Their staff doing all the coordination somewhere in the Philippines, in Argentina, in India. And if you get a quote below than ours, I would strongly advise that you don't get it. It probably means that it's all happening overseas, or there's crowds. Australia's quite slow on the uptake of technology, so this would mean it's most likely done overseas as well. That you put a text online and translators volunteer to translate various parts of it, and it's done as a sort of crowdsourcing method. I think I've spoken very fast and I've said quite a lot. I might leave it at that unless anybody has any specific questions.
So we've left the last 15 minutes for questions. I have one to Dominic and one to Nicholas. So I'll start with Nicholas, if that's all right, because I think what we described here, on top of all the steps that we have to do and on top of all the running around, is that you're kind of a meat in the sandwich there, aren't you, Nicholas? So on one hand, you're there to make sure that the clients get the best outcomes, the best price, and the best quality. On the other hand, we have colleagues, interpreters, translators, people that I've already said are suffering right now. And, I guess the easiest thing to do would be to send this stuff overseas and rubber stamp it. We hear of all kinds of people doing that. So how do you manage, that pressure of being the meat in the sandwich, and make sure that not only your clients are happy and they get the best product there is, but also we don't, in that chain of 150 people, we don't abuse people's trust, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Look, and short answer, not easily. At times, it can be very difficult to navigate and negotiate through those conversations. Sometimes they can be very difficult ones. We speak with a lot of non-for-profits that might not have a lot of budget, but then on the other hand, you've got translators who need to feed their children. There's very, very big separation between client on one hand and then our people on the ground, such as translators and DTP specialists, project managers, and all the. My title is written there. I'm the client relationship manager here at Polaron, and my heart will always lie with clients. I always have their interests in mind, and I've always got their pockets in mind as well. Sometimes it can be difficult, but we will always navigate and deliberate to a point where we've got the best price for our translators or interpreters, but also a price that is, good enough for our client to get it in within their budget. The biggest thing I ask for from my clients when we talk about things like this and have these kinds of conversation is simply transparency and trust. I require the trust from the client to know that we are doing the best we can to deliver them the best price and the best quality. And I also need their transparency to tell me how their budget looks, what their requirements are, and what they realistically can go for. Those two factors alone allow me to navigate that landscape so much easier and create a better environment in general between translators and our end clients. So I think those two factors, transparency and trust, are the two key things there.
Because I think the last thing you want to do in a situation like that is cut corners where, the processes that we described are there for a reason. Initially when and you mentioned it, Nicholas, when we started with community approved translations, it was essentially something we made up. It didn't exist. Fair enough, now does, and other people are delivering similar things. But we looked at the situation of the market and thought, okay, how come so much rubbish translations are being produced? Essentially, Polish is a language that has now come down as far as demand, but 20 years ago, 15 years ago, it was one of it was in top 10. And I was reading this stuff in Polish and other languages, and I just couldn't believe how poor the quality was. So we thought, okay, if we co-design with our colleagues, with community organizations, and with the clients, that'll be a much better outcome. And then when we started looking into it, we discovered that there were already efforts, but people were not getting paid for it. So somebody might go to, Pronia, or it used to be called Greek Welfare, and ask them to check the translation, but not pay them for it. So they were overwhelmed with these kinds of requests. So we actually, so that people understand, in our pricing, all of those people are actually getting paid. All of that is built in. Dominic, tell us, you come from a company, well, a few years ago now, I should say, that's one of the biggest providers of language services in the world, actually, I think probably in top 10. And it's a very different institution because it's based in Europe, and, a lot of the work you did, I believe, it was to do with European Commission and Parliament and whatever. I would like you to tell us about the competitive nature of the industry, because you're very well across it. And what I mean by that is how do you remain competitive on a market that, I think there's something like 400,000 providers in the world. The market's worth like 43 billion globally. How do we firstly remain competitive, and secondly do the right thing by everybody in terms of clients, vendors, staff, and all of that? What is your role and in that, and how would you explain all of those synergies and behind the scenes relationships?
Okay, easy question. Thank you very much. Am I on?
Yeah, you're on. Yeah,
I am on. Okay, broadly, I would say there's three things that you need to keep an eye out. There's products, there's relationships, and solutions. So you need to be solution focused. The client comes to you, you need to be able to solve their problem. You need to identify what it is, because sometimes they can't do it themselves. And then you need to be able to present it. Product is a good example. For example, is our community approved translation product. We saw in the market that there were translations of poor quality. We saw that there's a lot of people that care about, ticking the right boxes, make sure that everything is correct, but how do they know? So we came up with this idea of community approved translations, and now you can buy this product from others. So you need to be innovative. You need to come up with solutions, products for the market that work. And then above and foremost, you need relationships. You need to build relationships with your translators. So we've had the same ones on our books for years now. And you need to have relationships with your clients. And the more transparent you are and the more trustworthy you appear to be, the better those relationships are over time. So we hear from clients, yes, you're more expensive than others, but we know we can trust you. We can give you our translations with our eyes shut, and we know that we will get a good result. I don't know what else to add at this point, other than the poor quality of translation reminds me, you were talking about Polish. I'm just throwing this in for fun, that you were talking about, I think you reported this to me. It was a government website somewhere, or a community organization, and there was a member login in Polish, and the translation of that would explain how computers get viruses, but the word member was definitely not what you would imagine.
No, no.
So there you go. There's no great secret. You need to keep an eye out for the market, try and be solution focused, and have good relationships.
And I think it's also fair to say that our prices are competitive, so we're not in some way, more expensive than anybody else. What I'm going to do with the 5 minutes that we have left over is hand over to Andrea, because I can see quite a few questions being asked. So go for it, Andrea.
All right. Can you hear me, guys?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we have a question here. I'm not sure if you can answer this, but how much of what is paid goes directly back to the community checkers and interpreters?
Yes, so I'll hand that over to Dominic, but I'll just say that a very large percentage of it does. We working through a social enterprise model at the moment to get it even better for our colleagues. But over to you, Dominic, if you could comment on that.
Okay, so when I did my little presentation part, we talked about overheads, and overheads are large or smaller depending on the company. Ours are quite high, so about 60% goes to the translators also. On top, there's other things that get counted out, but we pay them the going rate, absolutely the going rate. Nobody would complain that we underpay. Most people that we know and most other providers that we know pay less or the same. There aren't many that we know that would pay more. I should also point out that there are plenty of providers that charge more than we do. I forgot to add that. That doesn't necessarily mean better quality either. You have to look out for transparency and the points that we mentioned previously. Those will match the quality markers. I've lost track of the question now. And how much do we give? We have a very exciting product coming out fairly soon. Sorry, we've got a very exciting product coming out soon for interpreting only, and that really we want to transfer 80% of the whole fee straight to the interpreter's pocket. We're working very hard in the background to make that happen. We hope to be able to have it happen.
I think we've lost Dominic there for a minute, so I'll hand over for the last question, Andrea.
Yeah, we still have 1 minute for another question. So this question relates to emerging languages and quality, as well as audio translations. How to ensure high quality of translations into emerging languages, and how much does price vary between audio and written translations?
I'll let Nicholas handle that one, but I'll just say that when it comes to any languages that are not NAATI-certified or are rare, emerging, or ones that, there are very few translators and interpreters, we had to apply extra layers of checking and quality control. And that is because we also want to be able to sleep well at night. So whenever we work with colleagues that may be not as experienced, or they may not have, certain credentials, we do a lot more hand-holding. And I'll let Nicholas handle the rest of the answer.
Yep, definitely. I think with rare and emerging languages, we can still apply our community-approved notion to those translations. Although there may not be NAATI certification for certain languages, there definitely are community organisations out there that do facilitate those rare and emerging communities. So we can always consult with them and ensure that the product we're putting out there is always approved by them and is culturally appropriate. I'll give a good example here of how we also onboard those new and rare emerging languages into our organisation. We had the case of a Bislama interpreter, which is language of Honolulu. So it's a rare and emerging language, not one we would have typically here in Australia, not one that's definitely NAATI certified. So how do you go about finding a good translator or interpreter? Well, it's about contacting the relevant community organisation, speaking to them and having a bit of a meeting, in essence, as to who might be the best fit to become, that language personnel for that language. And once we've got that person, we then consult with our more trained and specialised interpreters and translators. And in this instance, we had Eva brief the Bislama interpreter because she's a trained vet in the Australian translation scene, some might say. So she was able to pass on the necessary knowledge and skills and tips that would help assist this new and upcoming Bislama interpreter to deliver the translations and interpreting in a quality manner. With that, we then obviously check how they went and follow up with regular feedback and training to help improve their skills even more. And that's how we kind of handle rare and emerging languages, I would say.
And I'll just add to that there will be occasions where we will refuse certain bookings because there isn't anyone that can fulfill that role, or we're unable to support them, or there is risk that the participation of a person that's untrained will do more damage than not. So of course they go through our vetting process, and we check all kinds of things, including police checks. But you can imagine how much logistical support you have to provide to someone that's, I guess, less experienced or doesn't have the right credentials. So that we do that on a case by case basis. I don't know whether we've answered the question well, but it is for languages that have fewer practitioners, or I guess the quality is not there, or there are concerns. We just put extra layers of support. We do a lot more hand-holding and a lot more logistical support, so that we're not exposing anybody to risk, and we do more checking, more hand-holding, and just it's more intense and a lot more work, I guess. So I think we've run out of time. So what I will do is firstly thank you, a couple of special people that dedicated their afternoon to this. So firstly, Nicholas, thank you for, as always, being very ready to jump on those webinars. Thank you, Dominic, for sharing your experience, information. I'm sure that if anyone wants to speak to you about calculations and cents and dollars, they can. To Andrea, who's helped us behind the scenes, but also to those of you, and there have been quite a few people that joined us this afternoon. On the screen there in front of you, you can see the entire team that you can contact and speak to about anything that you need to speak about. June is a month of, it's the end of financial year. You have money to spend. Nicholas is your man. He's sitting there waiting for your phone call. But in all seriousness, if we can support you in any way by providing you information, advice, anything from languages that you might want to choose to mode of developing your information, we're there and we can help. On that note, thank you very much, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
See you guys.
Bye.